I think we get fixated on what we remember of a, senior enlisted petty officer or junior officer at the end of their tour.
Right.
And we forget that we all start as this mold of clay that really doesn't look good and doesn't operate well and doesn't know what the rules are. You're never probably going to be as good right off the bat as the
Right.
person that you're replacing. So just managing expectations very early on for us as the leaders, I think is as critically important as managing their expectations.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of On Authentic Leadership with the Colonel and the Coach. I'm one of your hosts, Matt Smith, along with Cam Ellsworth. And today we have an exceptionally special guest with us, President Bill Kelly from Christopher Newport University in Virginia. President Kelly, welcome. Thank you very much for taking your time to be on our podcast. Before we kind of get going, if you could kind of just tell our audience, explain to our audience, what your current role is, and then just some of the experiences or the experience maybe that shaped your life and shaped your experiences. So, sir, once again, thank you and welcome, and over to you.
Thanks, Matt. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today, and I've had the opportunity to watch some of your podcasts. And
Thank you.
Rich Schneider's podcast obviously is a huge mentor to all of us, and that was wonderful. And I have a son who's in the Coast Guard. He's a lieutenant commander, and I have a son who's a coach. So I kind of feel like I'm with my people.
Perfect.
Back in the day, I can never forget, and I'm getting way ahead of myself here, but I was a third class cadet at the Coast Guard Academy, and I got on the payphone to my dad and said, "Dad, I'm gonna drop out. I'm gonna go to Springfield College and become a coach." And he asked me a couple questions, and then he said, "Hang up the phone, go back to your room, and study." And I'm kind of glad he said that, and I think about that often. I think I would have been a good coach, but I think I've been a better Coast Guard officer and now a president. So 1987 graduate of the Coast Guard Academy, spent over 10 years at sea, had two different commands. But when I wasn't at sea, I really found my love and passion in training and education. And had the opportunity to do that at a couple different places in the Coast Guard. One was right up the road from here in Yorktown, Virginia, at Training Center Yorktown. I'm currently in Newport News, Virginia, where Christopher Newport is located. I've really got a passion for helping other folks grow and develop and really focusing in on those skills and talents that teams need. And so the Coast Guard sent me off to graduate school. I got to go to Florida State, which was an interesting experience for 18 months, and then come back. And so when I wasn't at sea, and I was at sea, my first day as an executive officer was September 11th, 2001.
Wow.
We all know what happened that day.
Right.
So I was up in Boston on a cutter and actually left that cutter from Crete 2 years later with the Sixth Fleet for Operation Iraqi Freedom. It was an interesting time for all of us and an interesting time in my career. Never thought I'd leave a Coast Guard ship from Crete, flying out of Athens, back to the States. But that was a great time as a New Yorker. That was a day that shook us all, and then continued to kind of matriculate through there. I had the opportunity to be in charge of Coast Guard Officer Candidate School, which was a great time at the Coast Guard Academy there. And then went back to sea and command, and then came back and was in charge of the Coast Guard's Leadership Development Program, where we offer over 24 different leadership programs for civilian, military, enlisted officer, and reserves. And then was really fortunate to be selected to go be commanding officer of Training Center Cape May, which is where we have our boot camp. So I had OCS checked, I had boot camp checked. The boot camp experience was amazing, right? You see these kids get off the bus, on Tuesday night, they don't even know how to walk. They get on the yellow footprints, and 7.5 weeks later, they're marching loud and proud across the parade field, going out into the Coast Guard. So that was a wonderful time for me in the Coast Guard, but also for my family to live in Cape May, New Jersey. There's a lot worse places you could live. And then, yeah, right. And then, some time in headquarters, did my time in headquarters and paid my dues, and got the call one day to be selected as flag officer, and was just to the moon, and really started to think at that point in time, like, you know what, maybe if the stars align and everything works out, I could actually have the opportunity to serve as superintendent at the Coast Guard Academy. And lo and behold, I'll tell you this quick story real quick. That's an oxymoron, right? A quick story real quick. But our vice commandant's the one who does the detailing for flag officers. And so he's a great guy from Arkansas. And he calls me up to his office. He says, "Billy, come on in. I want to tell you where you're going. And he goes to reach for the door and he says, go have a seat. And as he's closing the door and he's got his back to me, he said, Billy, we're going to send you to the Coast Guard Academy. And he turns around and I'm just bawling. I'm just crying from, and he's like, he looks at me, he goes, well, you do want to go there, don't you? And just, I loved every minute of it. Actually, Rich Snyder was a huge, huge mentor as I prepared for that job, and then 6 months in, COVID hits, and so we navigated the academy through COVID. Those were some very, very trying times. And then came out of it on the other end. I think we came out of it pretty well, all things considered. And, then it's kind of the end of the road, right? 36 years in the Coast Guard and it's time to go. And my wife and I, having had the opportunities at OCS, at boot camp, at the Coast Guard Academy, we really knew what we liked doing together. And we liked, being around young people to keep you young, serving them, supporting them, and seeing them grow and develop. And so we said, hey, let's take a look at what's available in the higher ed or maybe secondary education world. And so I started kind of putting some feelers out there. And somebody said, Bill, you should look at Christopher Newport. They had an amazing president here, been here 26 years. And a lot of coasties go through CNU because of its proximity to, DC, its proximity to Portsmouth, where we have a lot of coasties and just familiarity. And I think our core values here align very well with the service. And so I came down with my wife while we were still on active duty, kind of took a behind the scenes tour and got in the car afterwards. And I turned to her, I said, honey, what do you think? And she looked at me and she said, you better get this job. And I said, yes, ma'am, I will. So we worked our tail off and they gave me a call on December 14th, 2023 and 2022 and said, we'd like you to be the sixth president of Christopher Newport University. I like to say I'm in my junior year now, getting ready to finish up here in a couple of weeks. And it's been everything that I hoped it had been and a lot more. And we could probably talk about that as we go forward. So I think I've been very blessed with an amazing career. And I'm very grateful for my dad to say, hang up the phone, Bill, and go back and study physics. It worked out. It definitely worked out.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Yeah. And so just for context for our listeners is, I had the opportunity to spend a few years at Norwich University and where I met, like President Kelly said, a mentor of all three of us really is President Snyder. Cam spent, I think, close to 7, Cam, roughly total?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, one of the things President Kelly that Cam and I saw, and we see it in the athletic world, we see it in the military world, sort of the cradle to grave, you take somebody in, whether it's a young enlisted trooper, young officer, or even somebody in training, they go through a cycle, they go through the ropes. And I'd be interested in your perspective on when you look at, your early career about how, just the crucible, if you will, that someone went through just from a military perspective. And there's a certain crucible, I think, just having a son who's in college right now, his freshman year was just brutal. It was just hard. There was a hard transition from high school, just like there's a hard transition to boot camp, regardless of the service, that you go into and all that sort of stuff. And I've, Cam and I have both read up on what Christopher Newport, what you guys do, your level of engagement that you have with the students down there. And I would just, I'd be interested in your perspective on how you took, everything that you had when you were a junior officer to you're a senior officer, all the way to the superintendent to, and maybe some of those approaches that you take. And if someone's out there and say, well, I got some new people in my organization, what are some tricks of the trade, or what are some things that I can do to make sure that I stay authentic to myself as
Sure.
as I'm sort of onboarding someone who may not have sort of the experiences that I have. So I know that was probably a long question, but I just think you have a very unique perspective that, especially in today's day and age where you're sort of matriculating someone who's 17, 18 years old and you're handing them off at 21, 22, or maybe even you're matriculating an adult who's never been to school before.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, sir?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, Matt, one of the things, and Coach probably knows this, right? We all know it, but maybe you see it a little bit more, especially as you think about a freshman to a senior, maybe a student athlete. I think we get fixated on what we remember of a senior enlisted petty officer or junior officer at the end of their tour.
Right.
And we forget that we all start as this mold of clay that really doesn't look good and doesn't operate well and doesn't know what the rules are. Regardless of what your background is, whenever you enter into a new situation, you're never probably going to be as good right off the bat as
Right.
the person that you're replacing
Right.
or the people that, matriculated out or graduated or whatever it may be. So just managing expectations very early on for us as the leaders, I think is as critically important as managing their expectations as, again, whatever we're talking about, the student athlete, the student, the new employee, the new enlisted member, the new officer, right? They're just as nervous as we are about, are we going to get this done? And I think, my time at Cape May really reinforced that. Every week you got these newbies off the bus, and every week you graduated a class. And so
Right.
one of the things that I instituted was I had the class who was graduating on Friday show up on Tuesday night when the newbies got off the bus, and they'd be sitting there, they were in the dark, the shadows, and the newbies didn't know they were coming off the bus, but they'd be laughing and going, and I, occasionally whenever I interacted with them, I'm like, boy, they're screwed up, aren't they? I'm like, yeah, sir, they're all messed up. They can't even walk straight, and they can't walk and chew gum. And I said, you are exactly the same way, right? You were exactly the same way, but you listened to your company commanders, you formed as a team, you relied on each other, and you grew and developed into this, recruits who are ready to become seamen or firemen and go out into the service. And it was really important for me and my senior leadership team to reinforce that in the company commanders,
Hmm.
because some of the new ones were like, why aren't they getting this? Why aren't they getting this? It takes time, right? Everything takes time. And I'm a big proponent, a big fan of Bruce Tuckman. Bruce Tuckman was a professor of mine at Florida State, and Bruce has since passed, but he came up with the form, storm, norm, and perform,
Yep.
right? And we've all heard of that, the group dynamics. Well, individuals go through that as well. And I really try to think about here on our campus, and when I was in the service, whenever we're bringing new people in, we got to form them up, right? And I just had this question. I meet with the students in our President's Leadership Program. We do a pizza lunch, and we were having this discussion yesterday. And one of the students, who's a freshman, who's going to lead some of our onboarding activities this summer, she said, "Sir, we get them for 2 days. What can we do? What's the one thing we can do to bring them together?" And I said, "The one thing you can do is have them introduce themselves and provide an interesting fact about themselves, right? So now I can say, like, Matt, your son's at Salve? My son went to Springfield. They're in the same baseball. We can
Right.
develop a relationship,
Right.
because I can't trust you until I know you,
Right.
right? So,
Right.
so with our folks, like, how do we build that bond of trust as early as possible? Again, on a college campus, on the flight deck, in the
Right.
boardroom, wherever it might be. And so I think, as we think about transitioning folks into an organization, whatever that organization may be, how do you ensure that we don't get fixated on the person who left, right? Why aren't they as talented as that person? Well, they'll get there. You hired them because they have some talent. And then, how do you make sure that you build the team around them through relationship building?
Appreciate that, sir. I did not realize that Bruce Tuckman did the Foreman, Storm, and Norman for Foreman.
Yes.
Cam and I just had that conversation with someone the other day, and absolutely.
I was wondering if you could maybe touch on, you went through all these different steps, and um, what's changed and what's stayed the same. And I mean, like, 39, 40-ish years ago when you started, like in your peer group, right? Like how that interaction or that connection or the way the information was relayed to you versus how you're relaying and building that trust. I don't know if you can capture 40 years, but like, I'm sure that those kids are different a little bit, right? And so how are you connecting? And then what has maybe been true and tried, and you're like, that's the same. Maybe I have to get to it different, but maybe that comes back to the communication. If that makes any sense, is like, as the president of a university, how are you managing 2026 differently than it was managed, 39, 40 years ago?
Yeah. And so I don't know where we were, 29 or 30 years ago. And obviously I wasn't sitting in the leadership position then that I am
Yeah.
today. I've had the opportunity, over the privilege over the past 7 years, and really the past, maybe 10 of the last 14 years, to be around young people almost day in and day out. And I think we need to give them a little more credit. They navigated through COVID, they navigated through challenges in their lives and all of our lives, and they've done it pretty well. But they're definitely different than like when we came into the service or came in out of college or went off to college, where it was, the coaches yelling at us, the drill instructors yelling at us, the company commanders yelling at us. Let's break them down, right? And then build them up. And I'll never forget when we tried to evolve kind of what we were doing at the Coast Guard Academy, and they continue to build on it there now today, is let's not break them. Let's build them up. Right. And so we really focused on that in our training because I think there's a lower quotient of resiliency today than we probably had back in the day. So how do you build that tank of resiliency, right? How you build that ability for young people to bounce back? They haven't been pressurized in those situations maybe as much as we were. I mean, I never see a bunch of kids out on the street or in the in a grassy field, you know, playing kickball, playing wiffle ball, playing soccer, whatever it may be. I mean, it just doesn't happen that way. And I think we all developed a great deal of resiliency, just getting knocked down and getting picked back up again. It's incumbent on us as leaders to build that up. And one of the ways that I've tried to do it, at least the latter part of my career, is to be more approachable, to just have an air of approachability and try to engage with our students. So as I was transitioning from the military into civilian life, I realized that I probably didn't have a great sense of, what students were like. And I will tell you this, 3 years into it, I underestimated that, because we had this great cadre of students at the Coast Guard Academy, cadets at the Coast Guard Academy, or the ones I had the opportunity to meet at Norwich, or, the other service academies. Like, these kids are the best of the best, right? Well, these kids are pretty good too here. In fact, this morning we had our, I do this Wednesday morning walk. So when I'm coming to seeing you, I'm like, man, I gotta figure this out quick. Jim Ryan at UVA at the time did runs with Jim. And so I was chatting with him about it. And he said, it's a great way to get to know the students, Bill, get to know the community, kind of get a pulse of what's going on. I'm like, brilliant. And I like running. I've run a couple marathons. I haven't run nearly as many as Jim has. And I said, you know what? I'm going to do I'm going to do a walk. I'm going to do it on Wednesday mornings. We're going to do it at 6:30 a.m. And people looked at me like I had three heads. They're like, ain't nobody going to show up at 6:30 a.m., President. This new guy from the military bringing this on. And I said, you know what? I'm going to listen and learn. I'm going to be incredibly intentional about listening and learning. I didn't do a good job of that at the Coast Guard Academy because I thought I knew everything that had to go on at the Coast Guard Academy. And that was one of my failures. But I knew I had to learn from that. So I really was intentional about listening and learning from our students, from our faculty, our staff, alumni, community, and really trying to be as approachable as possible. So that first Wednesday, I come around the corner. I'm like, man, I hope there's like 5 or 6 kids here. There was 40.
Wow.
And we've never had less than a dozen. It doesn't matter if it's 30 degrees out. It doesn't matter if it's raining. We'll go to the gym and walk around the track. And today we had our ROTC cadets join me. And, it's just great to walk with them. And you guys know, it's all been in the news about what happened at ODU. That's impacted our students here pretty significantly in our cadre. We're only about 30 miles as the crow flies from ODU. So it was good to be with them today as they get ready to have a memorial service tomorrow for a lieutenant colonel who was shot and killed. So just good to be with them. But each and every day that I do that walk, I find out a little bit more about where we're at. The juniors are stressing about getting an internship. The seniors are stressing about getting a job. These are all the same things I heard at the Coast Guard Academy. They're all the same things I heard at boot camp. They're all the same things, that I heard from others. So these challenges these kids are facing aren't really any different. I think it's some of the tools that they have in the tool bag that they may have not have figured out how to use yet or haven't been asked to use that I think it's incumbent on us as leaders to find out what tools do you have, what tools do you know how to use, what tools don't you know how to use, and then how do we go from there? I mean, they all know how to use this thing, right? They can teach me how to use ChatGPT and all and the AI tools and things along those lines. But what can we teach them?
Right.
And so that's again, that's pretty inspiring and makes your day worth living.
No, that's awesome, sir. Appreciate you doing that because, I wrote down a lot of things, but the approachability piece, I can't tell you how important that is, and whether that's 18-year-old freshman to 50-year-old, president of a university, I think just everyone needs to be approachable. And that's just the thread that I just want to pull on here for a second. And I was going to save this round until later, but only because the way in which you just brought it up was just so genuine and authentic. I just would be remiss if I didn't address it now. Is Cam and I, one of the things that drew me to Cam was just his ability to connect to his student athletes. And hockey players are generally older, than a lot of other athletes just because they've had life experiences. They've gone and done junior hockey and they come back and all that sort of stuff. But I feel like, it's something that Cam and I still try to do to this day is just be authentic, but at the same time, treat people with dignity and respect, right? And just be kind to them. It doesn't hurt to be kind. You know what I mean? Like,
It doesn't cost you anything.
It doesn't cost you anything. Exactly, sir. And, and I know you said there's some things you learned at the Coast Guard Academy. Just you found out about yourself, and you found out yourself as you translated, as you went from that senior executive role at the Coast Guard Academy to the senior executive role at Christopher Newport. But just, and I don't think we can talk about this enough, but I would just like to get your perspective on, and obviously your wife seems like she's, an incredible human being, and she grounds you in a lot of ways, just like my wife
Oh
grounds
yeah.
me and keeps me grounded. And Cam's wife is the same. She's an exceptional human being. But I just, I'd like you to talk about that, because
Yeah.
you held up the phone, and I think that we can accuse our younger generation of not being in touch, not establishing those sort of lines of communication, and maybe being a little bit out of touch, or a little bit gnarly and all that sort of stuff. But just, I'd like you to talk to that kindness piece just for a second because a lot of times folks think of the military and they think that we're just all about barking orders, and do they do what they say because they respect you, or do they do what they say because you're a 3-star? I mean, and I think it's the same sort of thing in coaching, Anyways, I saw a comparison today, Bobby Knight versus Danny Hurley. You know what I mean? Like, similar coaching styles and whatnot. Did they get the most out of their player because they yelled and threw chairs, or do they get the most out of the player because the relationships that were established when the gym was closed and the doors were closed and all that sort of stuff? But anyways, that was just a long way of saying it's just, I think your approach is special, and I think it resonates with seeing you. I think it resonated at the Coast Guard Academy, and just if you could talk to that a little bit, I'd really appreciate it.
Sure.
So,
Matt, as students will ask me, can you give me, what's some leadership tips you can offer, sir? What experience do you bring from the Coast Guard, or whatever it might be? And, probably the biggest lesson I've learned as I get older in my life is just be kind. Work
Right.
hard and be kind. If you can work hard and you're kind to others and they want to be around you, you're gonna be able to go and do whatever it is that you want to do. On my own personal experience, my own growth, my own journey, I probably worked as hard as anybody, and I can work people into dust. And I've learned that I got to moderate that a little bit, right? But I probably didn't realize the value of being kind until I was maybe in '05. Right? Where now you're in command, you got, these 18, 19, 20-year-olds, you got 22-year-old officers. They don't need to be yelled at. They don't need to be hammered. They don't need to be ground into dust. And I'll never forget sitting in my stateroom, and my JOs were bumming. They were just bumming. And we're on a February patrol in the Northwest Atlantic. It's freezing cold. It's miserable. There's not an ounce of fun anywhere. And I could kind of sense that. And my XO said, I think you should talk to the JOs. And they came in and they turned the light bulb on for me. And they said, sir, it's not fun to go in the wardroom. It's not fun to go on the bridge. And it was me just grinding and grinding and grinding. Like, we got to do this. And it was like, holy crap, you're right. Because I'm not having any fun either. And it was like, it didn't take a lot, but it was just like that to go, wait a second, I'm in charge. I can set whatever mood I want, whatever tenor I want.
right.
I have the privilege of setting the environment. And then encouraging. And when I left that ship a year and 4 months later, my crew was crying as I walked away. We were hugging each other. I got rated as the best CO in the Atlantic area fleet, right? That would not have happened if a young JO didn't come up to me and say, "This kind of sucks," And and I was very fortunate to have a wife who is incredibly kind. I mean, she is, she's 5'1". She's from Vermont. So, she's a Spitfire. She's tough as nails. But boy, I tell you what, she can wrap people in kindness and get them to do anything like that. And so, fast forward in my career, as I come to the Coast Guard Academy, I kind of lost a little vision on that. And I got to tell you, COVID reset me. COVID was probably something, I came out of COVID a better leader than I went into it, because I needed to be reset. Because I went into the Coast Guard Academy, full of piss and vinegar, and I was going to save the world. And you know what? I wasn't. And COVID gave me an opportunity to reset and be more authentic, be more compassionate, be more empathetic, because you had to be. You just had to be. And so I think I've built on that as I came here to this institution. And I'll share a quick story. When I showed up, we were talking kind of on the break there about, folks think officers or military members are going to bark orders, and that's the only way we know how to lead. And when I showed up here, we got the faculty coming back, and they're like, I don't know who you are. I had one faculty member pull me aside, and she goes, I don't know who you are or where you came from. but we're not going to get, this is not the United States military, blah, 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 blah. And I just said, give me a chance. Give me a chance. And I said, I'm going to listen and learn, and I'm going to do the best job possible. I never talked to that faculty member again until April of the end of my first year. We were at a faculty reception. She was getting ready to retire. She came across the room like this at me. And I'm like, oh, no, here it comes. And I'm going to get I get a little emotional when I think about it. She looked at me and she said, you did a great job. My only regret is I don't have more time to serve with you.
That's awesome.
And I was like, wow. And then, so that's like, okay, Bill, you did something right. Keep doing the right things right.
Right.
And then, translating this into the world that we all live in. We were just down in Nashville doing some alumni visits and meeting with some leaders in the industry who are graduates of CNU, and we brought some students along with us. So one day we're at the Grand Ole Opry, and we have 3 of our grads who are a songwriter, work in philanthropy and then work in marketing. And the songwriter gets up there, 2018 grad. He was a finance major here, went to New York, had a great job, and it just wasn't him. So he leaves and he goes to Nashville. And he's telling the story about, making decisions and having to, really kind of tough it out and, trying to work with others to become a songwriter. And then he pulls out his guitar and he goes, and then one day it happened, and this is Blake Shelton's 30th number 1 hit and my very first. And then he plays Texas,
Oh,
and like the students are like, oh my God, and then 2 weeks later, he wrote a number 1 hit for Ella Langley. And I didn't know who Ella Langley was prior to that, but I do now. It wasn't about writing a song or getting a number 1 hit or doing any of that kind of stuff. What he talked about was when I walked into that room with those other songwriters, they could have kicked me out. They could have said, we're good, man. We don't need you. But I was kind. I developed relationships. I gained their trust. And that was like, that just like kind of codified it. Like, it's so important. Like, and and they said, but you got to work hard because you're going to be told no time after time after time after time. But one day, Blake Shelton's going to go, that's a great song, man. And you're going to play it. So, just the importance of being kind and coupling that with working hard, right? Nobody wants to work with a jerk, right? I mean, nobody, and you're not going to hire somebody who doesn't fit your culture or fit your esprit de corps and doesn't bring all those things that you want. So being kind and working hard, there's no substitute for either of those. Yeah. Yeah. So coach, you know how the importance of watching film, right? Watching tape.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And I have a quote that I wrote down because I thought it might come into conversation today. We don't learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on our experiences. And one of the things, I hold that morning workout time, as sacred to me personally, because that's my time to watch the tape from the day before. How did I do working with Matt and with Coach on the podcast? Did I have my thoughts together? Did I do enough homework? Right. So yeah, okay, got it. Right. And then give yourself a little grace. Like I have a big meeting tomorrow with the faculty to talk about the budget. And that's really been eating up some of my mind space. So, if I wasn't fully prepared or fully present, right, give yourself a little bit of grace and go, yeah, but Bill, remember, you were also prepping for this thing, or, this was in the back of your mind, or, the Mets have a day game today. I'm wondering if they're winning, right? And, these things are all come into play. But I really think that, there's a reason why we watch tape in athletics. There's a reason why we do after action reports. There's a reason why we do hot washes. I've introduced that to my community here. They're like, what's a hot wash? That's when we all get together and we evaluate how we did. And we figure out what we did well, what we can do better, right? And give ourselves some grace for some of those things that fell through the cracks. And if we could all just take 5, 10, 15 minutes to just reflect, give yourself some quiet time, however you do it, and reflect on the day before. some people like to journal, some people like to write it down. I don't do that, but I do reflect and go, man, I got to do better. Or I did pretty well with that. And, give yourself a pat on the back too. It's okay. But I really think that helps you grow and develop more than just being, hey, move on to the next thing, right? That's not where we'd be. You would never go into a game without having watched tape of your team and the other team. We should never come out of an operation, whatever it is, not gather your group together and go, okay, how do we do? I mean, some of the most important moments in my Coast Guard career were after we almost had mishaps or studying other mishaps. I'll never forget, and this is getting a little detailed, but back almost 20 years ago, the Coast Guard lost a couple divers off the Polar Sea or Polar Star. I'm not sure which one it was, but there was a diving mishap and we lost 2 shipmates. And when you read the report, it was like issue after issue after issue after issue. We were underway at the time. So I got my wardroom and my chief's mess together and we just went through it. And we just to learn from each other. I literally got a call during that operation and he said, sir, some Coast Guard units want to come out and fast rope on your deck. Are we going to be ready to do that, Captain? And I said, whoa, fast rope? We have no policies, no procedures, no protocol. We've never done it before. That's a dangerous operation. And they're like, I'm talking to them. I get them on the radio and they're like, no, we know how to do this. You may know how to do this, but we don't know how to do this. I literally wrote a message to the Atlantic Area Commander as a young commander, and they implemented policies to ensure that we govern and operate fast roping appropriately. This was back in 2006. I'm sure they've completely evolved from that at this point in time. But we're literally there's a Coast Guard cutter Healy. We're reading about this mishap on the Coast Guard cutter Healy. I get a call and I'm like, I'm breaking the error chain right now. Like, I'm going to reflect on what we just talked about and make sure that we don't have that going forward. So reflecting on what we do, how we do it, whether it's an after action report, whether it's personal, whether it's with a mentor, getting that feedback is so critical for our growth over time. Admiral Snyder is someone I still pick up the phone and go, Rich, I'm thinking about X, Y, or Z. And I get feedback from him and I usually take a lot of that to heart.
Sir, would you be able just to speak a little bit just about the importance of mentorship and really both sides? You've referenced obviously President Schneider and also referenced you have a military sports family connections and how that interweaves in the days and the lives of those. But just from being the mentee, right? The learning, the growing, and then giving that back, the mentor. If you could maybe just what comes to mind hearing that.
Yeah. So, one of the privileges of being on a college campus is you have the opportunity to engage in mentorship discussions, activities, events that are formal. And we've had a couple of those just this week with our business school and other things. And then you have the informal ones, right? The morning walk, the Wednesday morning walk, or just the opportunity to walk across campus or have a student say, hey, sir, can I come up and talk to you about service in the Coast Guard? All of those opportunities. And I think, my own experience, both in the Coast Guard and now, is that mentors come in all shapes and sizes, and you need them to come in all shapes and sizes. I think there's a little bit of misnomer that I need to have one mentor, right? And I have a great relationship with them. Yeah, having one is good. Having 5 is a heck of a lot better. I mean, when I think about going out and playing golf, there's somebody I'm going to talk to about that. But it's not the person I'm going to talk to about how do I manage the budget at the, at a state university. I don't want those two, being my mentors, but understanding that there's a difference between the two and kind of knowing there's got to be a little bit of a firewall that I think we as mentees need to make sure it's in there. And then also as mentors of mentees, there needs to be a firewall as well. And I think if you establish that firewall, students will never try to take advantage of you. And I think when I think about my Wednesday morning walks, they are the best hour of my week. In 3 years, I've never had a single student try to get me on a walk. Like, hey, President Kelly, how you doing this morning? Can we get more parking? Can we get more ice cream at the whatever? Can we, I'm having trouble with this grade. Can you talk to the professor for me? Never, right? It's always been very just, hey, doing today, sir? I mean, they're asking me, how are you doing today, sir? How are things going? How are you doing? Where are you at? So it's always been that. So I think establishing a firewall that's appropriate, right? So that everybody knows where their swim lane is. when you're engaging with them, and they don't try to take advantage of that relationship that they might have with someone who's offering up their time. I think that's an important note that we don't talk a lot about in mentorship. As mentors and mentees should be respectful of that as well. And so I think, when I think about mentorship, and if I was going to sit down and do a small podcast on that, I would say, have a lot, have as many, avenues in life that you want to explore. Seek out a mentor in each and every one of those, right? I mean, because we can all use somebody to bounce something off of. And then with mentees, be available to them, be authentic, be approachable, but also let them know that there's some guidelines, and you got to operate within those guidelines. And some folks will have a little bit more access than maybe others, but, it's incumbent on us, whatever age we are, to give back. And that's one of the great things, right? I mean, as a sailor, as a cutterman, we always think about looking forward. Well, I'd like to share that we need to look back. We need to see who's in our wake and how are they doing. Like, did we churn them up in the props, or are they commanding their own ship? Are they commanding their own family? Are they doing the right things for society? What we like to say here is, are they living a life of significance? Are they going out and living our core values? And that's pretty cool when you can see that and say, boy, I had like 2% to do with that, 0.5% to do with that. And that's why you do these jobs, right? That's why we're in the work that we're in. It's not about the wins and losses. It's about, the relationships that we develop.
Sir, in that context, I think there's been plenty of examples lately of just folks maybe not understanding how important it is to have, like, I think a little bit what I'd like to talk about is just the strategic vision piece. So,
Right.
like, for example, I'm listening to you talk, and I think that, you're doing everything possible to leave Christopher Newport University better than you found it, just like you tried to leave the Coast Guard Academy better than you found it. And again, like the reflection piece, there's probably things you wish you'd done better, but you didn't have
Mhm.
the perspective that you have now. Is there anything that you just wanted to share that, just something that you're like, wow, like, I have this incredible opportunity. I'm in my junior year of my presidency. And I, this is as we set sail, and obviously 2026 there's plenty of challenges abound from probably from a university, state, national, global perspective and all that sort of stuff. But just to kind of keep it real, is there anything that you just want folks to know, like, hey, here's the nut that I'm trying to crack, and here's some of the team building that I'm doing to kind of tackle something which is, obviously not impossible, but yet something that's a hard problem, if you
Sure.
will.
Higher education right now is in a very interesting spot. I know folks in Vermont are living this, but the demographic cliff is something they talk about. And if you look around in our neighborhoods, there's just a lot less high school students. There's a lot less high school students that are going off to college.
Right.
There's a
Right.
lot less young men that are going off to college.
Right. Right.
So as a president of a university that's a public university that's striving to meet the needs of the Commonwealth of Virginia,
Right.
attract students from outside the Commonwealth to come, it's a lot warmer here today than it is where you guys are at. It's 80 degrees.
Yeah.
My
True
students are
statement.
out playing Frisbee on the great lawn.
Yeah.
I think the baseball team has a game right now.
Right.
How do we attract students here and meet the needs of those students in a economic environment of higher ed that's incredibly challenging? So when I came into the job 3 years ago, and as I said, we had an amazing president who was here for 26 years and really built this campus that we have. But one of the things that was lacking was a strategic plan. And I said, well, we kind of need one of those. We need to make sure we have a vision of where we're going. And Christopher Newport was the captain of the three ships that left London in 1606, December of 1606. Not a brilliant move, but it worked. Sailing across the Atlantic in a 54-foot vessel named the Susan Constant, the Godspeed, and the Discovery, and landed at the mouth of the Chesapeake in April of 1607. That's amazing. And so when I thought about it, just kind of came to me on one of those moments of reflection. I said, you know what? Let's call our strategic plan the strategic compass, right? And give a nod of the cap to Christopher Newport. Doesn't point you in a straight line. It points you in a direction. And so as we work through our strategic compass, I said, this has to be a whole of university effort if we want it to be effective. And so we had over 200 voices with their hands literally on our compass, and we came up with 4 priorities. And it's, we're a liberal arts university, and we want to advance the power and promise of the liberal arts. We're a regional public university. We need to connect with our community. we need to be the most inclusive university in the state of Virginia, and we need to build a foundation to thrive economically, enrollment wise, and sustainability wise. And so what that has done is it truly, because we brought the community together to build it, it's energized the campus. And so when I talk to folks about things, they'll go, well, in the compass, we said we were going to do this, or one of the compass priorities is that. So now it's us talking about it. It's not the president or the president's staff or the cabinet saying we need to do X, Y, or Z. It's the university saying we need to do X, Y, and Z. And it's going to be incumbent on me and our senior leaders to keep referring back to the compass, make sure that we stay, pointed in those directions, not on a straight line, because we're going to, things are going to happen in life, right? We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but we have a plan to deviate off of, right?
Right.
And we all know that the best plans never survive first contact with the enemy.
Right.
And we're contacting with the enemy on a day in and day basis, but we got a plan to work off of. And I think that's critically important. So, as I think out 5 years for Christopher Newport University, where do I want us to be, right? I want us to be the number one regional public university in the state of Virginia. We are that now, right? We aspire to be the number one regional public in the country. We're number 3 in the South right now. So we're working in that direction. We have one of the best athletic programs at the Division III level. On the Learfield Cup standings, which are going to come out tomorrow, we're going to be in the top. We're going to be the number 4 in the nation from a public school perspective. It's tough to compete with Middlebury and Tufts and Williams and all those folks, but we're number 4 for public. That's pretty impressive. Our men's basketball team just finished up in the men's Final Four. We've sent every team so far this year to the NCAA tournament. That's field hockey, volleyball, women's and men's soccer. Football went undefeated, and both women's and men's basketball. And our softball, baseball, and lacrosse teams are tracking that way. So, we're anchored in excellence in all that we do. And so ensuring that we stay focused on the core missions of this university are going to be critical while we deal with the headwinds that are around us. And so, I will go to bed tonight thinking about that, because I'm going to get up tomorrow and talk to the faculty about it. And that'll be an interesting conversation, but a good one, because we have great faculty here and they are truly pulling in the same direction.
Sir, as you work on the compass and transforming, and even back in your military time, one of the things that, Matt helped me, I think, get better at, and is kind of the empowerment of those around you. And you get promoted, or you raise through an organization, sports, whatever, hopefully because you've done a good job. And then you're asked to kind of do something else, but you still want to get your hands dirty and you want to do things. Any advice to those? Matt talks about getting from, the ground level to the 6,000, the 10, the 20, the 30,000 foot view. As you've elevated, and you're having time to have reflection and grow, again, you need a lot of your team around you, but you need to empower that team to be great with you and for you.
Yeah.
What can you speak to on that?
Coach, one of the things that I found interesting in my 3 years here that was very different in the military, the only question I think I failed on in my interview for this job was in the final interview. And somebody asked me, if selected for this position, who are you going to bring with you? And I was like, I literally stumbled and fumbled. Because I'm like, I don't bring anybody with me. People get orders in, they get orders out. I get a little bit of say in who my team is, but by and large, you're just getting dealt the cards you're dealt. And I will say this with great assurance. I have turned over 16 people on my senior leadership team, and that's down to the deans. When I say 16 people, not all of them are new to CNU, but 16 of them are either new or in new positions. You got to form your own team. It has to be your team, especially when you follow a leader who's been here for 26 years and built his team, built his culture. And I think about, the moves that we had to make, and some of those are hard, right? You're making hard decisions. You got to ask some people to move on, or give them the opportunity to move on, or ask them to change. And if they can, it's time to go. So you do have to put your fingerprints on it. It has to be your folks who are, aligned with you and pulling in the same direction. And I think about watching our coaches coach. They probably, right, all good coaches do the vast majority of their work. The vast majority of their work is done before they hit the court or the field. And, as we were chatting about a little bit earlier, I love watching our coaches coach the game more than I do watching the game, because I can tell when our coaches know that they're in a dogfight. Like they're playing against competition that's right there with them because they're a lot calmer. They're a lot more focused. They're a lot more, I don't want to say hands-on because they're not. They're letting their players do what they prepared them to do. So I try to take that back, and then when we're playing a team that we're going to beat by 20, they're jumping up and down and screaming and yelling and, because they're just trying to get their student athletes' attention and they know they're going to win the game. They're coaching for the next game, right? They're coaching for the next challenge. They're coaching for that Final Four appearance. And so I really enjoy watching them and then taking some of that back, right? And making sure that I'm coaching up my senior leadership team in a similar fashion so that when a challenge occurs, and they occur daily, that it doesn't require I can do this podcast with you because I know my chief of staff and I know my, head of facilities and my VP for advancement are all out doing their job, right? And they know what my expectations are and I know what their capabilities are. And we can connect when we need to, coach them up and then send them on their way and often do good things. But you do have to stay connected, right? You do have to see the results and you can't just, you can't fire and forget, right? We don't want to fire and forget on any of these things. And I think my team has learned after 3 years that if the president asks him about something, he's probably not going to dog him about it. But 3 weeks later, he might come back and go, "How are we doing on that?" And so, but that's right. That's having your team, on campus doing the things that they're doing, and not somebody else's team who may have, had it worked under a different leadership style.
Sir, what role, what role do you see, you had mentioned in your email, just the sort of the connective tissue, the sinew, if you will, that kind of keeps someone engaged in athletics, you use Greek life, the religious, the religion piece. And I looked at that as those are, I would look at that in the vision that I had when I was a commander at multiple levels, mentally, physically, and spiritually prepared to do whatever it is I was asked to do. That could be deployed to combat. That could be get my crew ready for, going to red flag to do, high intensity, the toughest training we've ever done and stuff like that. And you were a student athlete back in the day. I guess just if you could just kind of talk to someone who's trying to find their way, and maybe academics isn't their thing. Maybe, and that could be academics at a service academy. It could be academics at a tech school, at a trade school or whatever. But can you just talk about just, from where you sit, how important it is to establish that connective tissue, kind of regardless of what it is?
Are we talking about the member or our responsibilities?
No, the member. So some of the things, like if someone's on, say for example, like the walk with you, and they're like, "Hey, sir, I'm just not getting it." You know what I mean? They're like, "I understand that I need to sign up for four classes, carry this amount of, this workload and all that sort of stuff, but I'm not feeling, and who knows? Maybe they came from a high school where they were just the top dog. You know what I mean?
Sure, yeah.
And they figured out high school, and we all know those people. They figured out high school. They figured out whatever, and they get to the next level, and they're just like, "Oof, this wasn't this wasn't how I envisioned it." And if you could answer that question, not just in the context of Christopher Newport, but just, maybe even just from a life perspective as well. Over.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good question. And probably one of those things that, I personally haven't maybe given as much thought per se. When you see somebody struggling or they come to you, they're struggling, or you hear about them struggling, we immediately want to come with solutions, right? A solution set. But we don't even know what the root causes are. And so how do we get to the opportunity to have those conversations where we can get at the root cause of what's challenging, a person? I think about this in my own relationship with my two sons. I have a 33-year-old son who's an officer, as I mentioned earlier, and a 30-year-old son who's a coach. And they come to me on occasion with different challenges in their own life. And usually what you hear on the phone or in the conversation is really not what the challenge is.
Right.
It's really something below that.
Right.
And so, sometimes mom is a better, one to get at that. And sometimes dad's a better one to get at that. But I would offer to the person, young, old, student, non-student, military member, non-military member, if you feel yourself struggling, we can go back to our mentor-mentee, conversation. There's somebody out there who's going to be kind to you. There's somebody out there who's going to lend a hand to you. There's somebody out there who cares about you. And sometimes you just have to ask. What we say to our students here and what we said at the Coast Guard Academy is we don't know there's a problem sometimes until you come forward with it. We look at people, right? We look at people on campus, we look at people at our units and we go, they're full up. They're full up around, right? They're ready to
Right.
go. We have
Right.
no idea what's going on inside. No
Right.
idea,
Right.
right?
Right.
But the minute they put a boot on their foot or their arm in a sling, it's like, hey, how you doing, man? Can I help you with this? Can I help you with that? Right? And we never think about all of the things that we're bringing to work each day, that we're bringing to school each day, that we're bringing to practice each day. And so how do we as leaders give time and space to unpack some of those things? And what we're working on campus here is, and we're just dipping our toe in the pool, is that we're seeing more of that with young men and young women. Young women are asking for help. Young women are reaching out and looking for mentors. Young women are engaging in clubs and activities. Young women are seeking leadership roles, not only in female organizations, but co-ed organizations. I'm on my 4th student government president, all been women, and they're fabulous. They're rocking it, right? I'm worried about our young men. They're not engaging at the same level. But what we're finding is, they are engaging with their teams. They are engaging in Greek life, and they're engaging more and more in their spiritual life.
Right.
So the good news is they're engaging in those things. I'm worried about the folks who are falling through the cracks, who
Right.
aren't engaging in those things, women and men.
Sir, in that context, and I'm sorry, Cam, I'm jumping in front of you again. Do you guys have a program? And again, I don't know the answer to this question, so legitimately I'm asking. But uh, nowadays, like for example, Cam and I we're wingmen. Right? I don't know how to play hockey. Cam doesn't know how to fly on an AWACS, but it doesn't really matter. We're like life wingmen, right? Do you have that sort of a program, going at Christopher Newport? Just because, I mean, life is hard. I mean, it just, nowadays it's hard. And I don't care what age you are. It's just, there's challenges abound and how you navigate those challenges. And if you got a shipmate, if you got a wingman, if you got a battle buddy, it just makes life a little bit easier. In some cases, the battle buddy might be your spouse, right? It might be girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, depending upon your relationship. And I just, when I hear you talking, it almost sounds like you've instituted something like that, or you're working towards something like that at CNU.
I really like the idea of the wingman or the shipmate.
Yeah.
And that's that we know that, right? It's
Right.
it's
Yeah,
tangible, it's
right.
real to us.
Right.
We have the captain's care program. We have RAs,
Yep.
resident assistants.
Yep.
We have all of those folks who really fill some of those roles, but we haven't labeled it as such. And the fact that we are the captains, I think having something like, be a shipmate is
right.
something that I might pivot off of this discussion here and just build that concept, like be a good captain, be a good shipmate for one another. One of the things that we do here, that's a tradition that folks hold near and dear, is we hold doors for each other.
Yep. Love it.
And holding doors, what I like to share with folks is, it's polite, right? It's the kind thing to do.
Right.
But it also means I see you, I
Yep.
value, I respect you.
I love that.
And I think that's a token act that can just say, okay, somebody sees me, right? I
Right.
may not want to have a conversation with you,
Right.
right? I may not want to engage with you,
Right.
but you see me. You didn't just let the door slam in my face.
Right.
And now I'm going to look behind me and see who's coming after me. And so little things like that can build a broader spirit, right? We talk about having a speaking tradition on campus where folks see each other, they look each other in the eye, and they talk. Now, I'm not Pollyannish about this. Everybody's walking around with something in their ear, kind of like Cam's got, in his ear now, right? I mean, either of you guys, right?
Yeah. Right.
The vast majority, and they got their phones and they're doing this, so when I go, hey, how you doing today? They're like, oh, hey, President Kelly, how you doing? But
Right.
sometimes you got to force it a little bit and
Right.
engage with.
Right.
But I do like that idea, Matt, and that's something, I think we're doing it, but I think we can label it and be more intentional about it. So I might steal that from this.
That, sir, I honestly look forward to I travel to Langley at times. And so I think I was talking to Trisha the other day, I think it's just right down the road. So hopefully I get an opportunity to visit you and not steal your time, but maybe I can show up at one of the 0630 walks and listen and bend your ear then too as well. So look forward to
Matt, let's talk about that, because seriously, one of the things that we do is we have this President's Leadership Program, and we have speaker series. Last night we had Carly Fiorina here to speak to our students in the President's Leadership Program, about 1,000 students, and then we had another couple students who show up, faculty show up, that kind of thing. But we're looking at our 26, 27 speaker series. And what we found is our students resonate with what you guys are doing,
Right.
right? Right. Carly was great, and she was. She could talk about, Virginia 250, to run as president, presidential candidate, CEO of Hewlett Packard, and she did a wonderful job. But my sense is that you guys would connect with our students. So if we can put a pin in that and follow up, off camera, that would be great.
I'd love to do that, sir. Thank you very much. I'm honored and appreciate that. Cam?
Yes, sir. Again, thank you so much for your time. And one of the things, I guess I've just written it down, and there's just two traits that I would like for you to please just speak on, because in the athletics context of throwing chairs, we've talked about it in the military context of, the yelling, screaming, demeaning thought process. And I just feel like your empathy and humility has come through our conversation, and that resonates with me. The way that I tried to serve people. But again, I think it's harder to lead that way, or maybe it can be. And if you could talk about maybe why that's a strength for you, and why those are strengths for leaders, to have empathy for others and to have humility. Again, if you could just speak to that and how that's kind of shaped you.
Yeah, Coach, I want to just take a moment before I answer that question and let you know that I didn't always get it right. I still don't always get it right. I'm not a finished product in any shape, manner, or form, even though I'm going to turn 61 here in a couple of days. I still try to reflect and learn and grow each day. And so, why I share this with you, I think about some of my shipmates who I served with, maybe decades ago, be like, man, that guy lit me up at, at Officer Candidate School, or, golly, he did this, that, or the other thing. But again, I think as we learn as we go, yelling and screaming, there's a time for it, right? Get your foot out of that line, right? Because you're going to get yanked and get killed and get tossed overboard, or, you need to get right. But there has to be a time and a place for it. And what works so much better is maybe just taking a moment and pausing and listening, giving folks the space to figure it out, and then stepping in. But empathy and compassion are something that I've learned from my wife. I've learned from folks like, Admiral Snyder, other folks that I've been around. And I'm like, man, I wish I could be a little bit more like them, a little bit more compassionate, a little bit more empathetic. And, being a grandparent helps you with that, right? I mean, that puts you in a whole different world. Just, so all of these things in life come together to make us who we are. And we put this on in the morning, we go off to work, but we're not a different person at work. And if we are, then we're probably not going to be successful. Right? So how do we ensure that we're our true self wherever we are? And spending an hour with you guys on this podcast, and I'll look forward to listening to it in the future, is a way for me to challenge myself to be true to the words that I'm speaking, because the last thing any of us want to have happen is, to share these thoughts that we're sharing here today, and then somebody go, man, that's not the guy I saw last week. Or he just blew me off, or whatever it might be. And so this is a way for us to challenge ourselves to be better. And so it's a privilege and an honor to be with you. And I don't know how many folks are potentially going to listen to this, but I know I will. And, and that will help me be a better person going forward, and hopefully be a little bit more empathetic and compassionate to myself, and help me demonstrate that to others as we go forward from this time and place.
I love that, sir. And as you were finishing up there, I thought you had used the word grace earlier. And I think that sometimes, not only give others a moment of grace, because we don't know their story. We don't know where they came from. We don't know the circumstances, but give ourselves a moment of grace, because I think sometimes we're our own worst critics, and we have expectations for ourselves that might just be just a little bit unrealistic, and we don't know that they're unrealistic, and maybe just give ourselves a moment of grace. First of all, we appreciate the perspective that your wife has given you, not just because we live in Vermont and she's from Vermont, but I think that all of us can take a lesson from that, and we just appreciate that she continues to keep you grounded. So just a big shout out to your bride, and what she brings. And of course, Cam and I feel the same way about our brides. But sir, we look forward to hopefully connecting in the future as well. And this has just been an absolute gem of time spent with you. So we'll give you the final words if there's anything that you wanted to say, but I just wanted to wrap it up from a colonel and coach perspective. And again, President Bill Kelly, president of Christopher Newport University, prior superintendent at the Coast Guard Academy, prior Coastie, unbelievable amount of life experiences that you share with us today. So sir, any final thoughts or words for our listeners?
Yeah, I just want to say, Colonel and Coach, I'm humbled and honored to have had the opportunity to be with you today. This was a learning experience for me. It gave me an opportunity to go back through, some of my experiences in life, and a lot of faces were flashing before my eyes as we talked about, the things that we did, and they all flashed before my eyes in a very good way.
Good.
And I think, one of the blessings in life is the opportunity to engage with others and to help develop and lead others. It is a truly privilege to lead. Maybe I don't even think we talked about it, but being a servant leader is what I believe we're all called to do. And so the opportunity to speak about that and speak to it and maybe help someone else in their development and their growth is something that I just feel privileged to do. And if anybody wants to swing by Christopher Newport University, and if you have a 17 or 18-year-old, we'd love to have you come on down. Yeah. But if you're in the area, please stop by, and you can find me at president@cnu.edu, and would love to continue the conversation. So again, thank you guys. And I commend you on the work that you're doing, and I wish you fair winds going forward.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you very much. Could not have said it better ourselves. So thank you.
Thanks, guys.